It may not seem like it now, but Star Wars Fallen Order was a game with unprecedented pressure. It has perhaps one of the most tenacious fanbases, an IP known in every corner of the world, a ruthless and desperate publisher in the form of EA, and if all of that wasn't enough, it's Respawn Entertainment that were tasked with delivering a Star Wars experience to please everyone. The studio, famed for its multiplayer, first-person shooters, and movement mechanics, were the ones tasked and responsible for doing all of this. Star Wars fans have been left wanting for a true single-player experience that not only captures the cinematic brilliance of the movies and TV shows, but one that can stand on its own with fresh characters and story arcs, ones that remain grounded and authentic to Star Wars, the kinds that made it a household name for decades. After the cancellations of Star Wars 1313 and codename Ragtag, I think plenty of players and gamers throughout the world frankly lost hope there would ever be a Star Wars game that could match the likes of Rogue One, The Mandalorian, and Andor. Then, in late 2019, we got Fallen Order. And now we find ourselves 2 parts of the way through a trilogy, and, well, this leaves me in a little bit of a predicament because you know on some level that Fallen Order is very good. It got a great sequel with Jedi Survivor, better in almost every measurable way, and this year or next, we'll see the conclusion of Cal Kestis's journey. So I don't think the question is, should you buy Fallen Order? So instead, I'm going to use this review and my time and do everything in my power to convince you to not skip this game, because I feel like that's why some people are going to be here, to have the slightly longer question answered, should you buy Fallen Order at all, or just play Jedi Survivor? It might not be obvious so far, but Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order stands tall as one of the best gaming adaptations, period. It breaks the mold and redefines what a Star Wars game could ever truly be. Nobody has played a Star Wars game that looks like this, or more importantly, feels like this. That's because Respawn didn't play it safe. They've taken risks when they didn't need to, and it mostly pays off. They could have phoned it in and played it safe with a cookie-cutter experience like Crystal Dynamics did with the Avengers game or the recent Suicide Squad game from Rocksteady. But they didn't. Instead, they took measured risks like the Souls-inspired combat and a canonical story that is every bit a Star Wars adventure. The end result is not just a brilliant Star Wars game. It doesn't need that asterisk. This is a great gaming experience, full stop. And that is perhaps the biggest achievement from Respawn here, inadvertently creating a fresh and authentic way and an exciting entry point for new fans while simultaneously delivering some of the best Star Wars content in decades. Respawn's choice to not hold back is even more commendable and impressive when you realize EA themselves potentially set them up to fail. Respawn is a stellar studio, this doesn't need explained. They have delivered the likes of Titanfall 2 and Apex Legends without breaking a sweat, but their expertise and 20-year legacy lies with first-person shooters with exceptional gun feel and their signature kinetic movement, not third-person story-focused games based on one of the world's most known intellectual properties with a fanbase perpetually left wanting for more. Luckily for EA, and probably to a lot of people's surprise, Respawn took this monumental pressure and turned it into a diamond, because Fallen Order comfortably stands toe-to-toe with everything in the Star Wars universe: the movies, the TV shows, the animations, the books, the comics, and of course, the games. But how did they manage to do this? This was no small feat. Long-standing franchises can unintentionally gatekeep themselves from new fans by simply having so much lore and history and content to keep up with. But with Fallen Order, we have a fresh story, fresh characters, and for most, fresh worlds to explore, and a story that is canon to the Star Wars universe. That means newcomers can throw themselves into Cal's journey just as eagerly as most of us did with Han, Luke, and Leia, and fall in love with these characters in the same way. If you wanted to, I think this is as good a place as any to start your Star Wars journey. If you're already a Star Wars fan like myself, I think the story being canonical is key. It raises the stakes, it makes it important, and setting this story between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope offers so much rich storytelling opportunities, and without spoiling anything at all at any point in this video, Respawn didn't miss. The end result is a carefully interwoven story, one that plays with both new and old concepts, but at its core, Fallen Order plays host to a band of brilliantly written and phenomenally acted characters, a group that not only stands right next to any other crew in the Star Wars universe, but ones you want to stay with long after the credits roll. And this right here is why you'll be hurting yourself if you skipped any part of this game just to play the better sequel. I can't imagine going through Jedi Survivor a few years later and experiencing anything close to the payoff I did if I skipped this fundamental part in not only Cal's journey, but Grease, Sir, and most importantly, BD1. And Respawn don't pull any punches. This is a story that explores deep remorse, survivor guilt, tarnished hope, and a bravery in all of its forms. I have platinumed both games. I have spent 80 hours between both. I promise you, it's worth the time, and if someone does skip Fallen Order, I think Jedi Survivor is worse for it. But how do we experience that story? I'm telling you it's brilliant. How do you get from one piece to the other? It's going to be combat. For some, the Souls-like combat I mentioned at the start might seem like a hurdle or a barrier too tall to surpass. It isn't a natural choice, nor one that would typically land with a big IP like this for people signing off on it. For lack of a better term, it's an unforced risk, but the end result isn't an unforced error. Yes, it is absolutely one-dimensional. Anyone coming from a Souls-like background will think this is pretty light, but Respawn knew exactly what they were doing here. It's a choice I imagine plenty of executives and people at Respawn in the higher-up positions debated endlessly, arguing for something more fluid and action-orientated, similar in nature to the newer Assassin's Creed games, or even an evolution of the Force Unleashed games. The best-selling game of 2022 and one of the best-selling games of the decade, Hogwarts Legacy, did exactly this. The combat was simple, but flashy and varied. It was a great combat system for casual players, and it had just enough depth to keep experienced players around for its 20-ish hour runtime. On the surface, Fallen Order sits in direct contrast to this with its Souls-like combat, but the system Respawn have opted for ends up being a softer take and approach on the famously unforgiving form of combat, but still one that emphasizes strategic and deliberate gameplay, focusing on precise timing, stamina management, and pattern recognition. Not so dissimilar to a Jedi, you'll find yourself in a more methodical combat encounter where each move matters, where your mistakes have genuine consequences, but never to the extent of an actual Souls-like experience, and I don't think that's a wrong thing to have. Even with the softer approach, there's even more deliberate design choices at play to make the Souls-like inspiration even more accessible to new players. For example, when you die and return to defeat the enemy that just killed you, you're rewarded. You're rewarded with full health and a full force meter. Another way is the meditation spots scattered throughout every level. These allow you to take a breather, stop, regenerate, get health back, get force back, but there's a trade-off. If you do stop to meditate, any enemies you killed up until that point will respawn. Both of these examples offer the player a lenient risk-reward opportunity that an actual Souls-like experience may not. And it's this finely tuned design trade-off and balancing act that Respawn does that turns what was once a bold and risky decision into a clear and unique identity for the trilogy, not just for Fallen Order. Perhaps even more impressively is Fallen Order taking this grounded and authentic Jedi combat from the original trilogy and merging it with a movement style that would be more at home in the prequel trilogy. Respawn have stayed well clear from their studio-defining foundation of movement is king and instead taken inspiration from Uncharted. It's basic, but it's well-fitting, a tried and tested formula that works with so many players. It does the job and still manages to ground you in the world that Fallen Order offers you. And that world is a character in and of itself. Each one is beautifully realized and manages in varying degrees to evoke a core visual hook that makes these worlds feel like they belong here. For someone who has only ever seen the Skywalker saga, these places are going to feel new, fresh, and kind of exciting at times, especially with the game's insistency on finding that sweet spot between old and new. The planets each feel distinctively different and never feel boring, though that's likely because the Mario world map seems to make an appearance. You've got the rock level, the forest level, the fire level, the snow level, and the water level. I don't hate it, but it was kind of amusing they mapped it like this, however intentional it was. That said, there are imperfections. While the visual markers and identity are out in force to hammer home Respawn's care for the authenticity, it's the level design, not the aesthetic, where my first and perhaps only real issue with Fallen Order rises. The levels are designed in a Metroidvania format, meaning, if you don't know, you can go from planet A to planet B, but before completing a particular task on planet B, you might need to collect something from planet C first. It could be an ability or a character interaction to progress the story, and once you've done that, you can go back to planet B and complete the overall task. It's a nice design trick to use the Metroidvania format here. It ensures the player will travel around with their crew pretty frequently, and you get to know them. You get to explore the galaxy and understand everything around it a little bit more. It also means that the game can feed you abilities and progress the story in a timely manner, while giving itself the chance to really show off everything it can do how they want to. This is great because it opens up variety for the player, and for a lot of people, this is going to be pretty unexpected. The problem this inevitably creates and brings with it, though, is the level-to-level experience lacks a solid structure. This is just the nature of Metroidvania. Because you can never tell where a player is going to go next, worlds can feel like they're fluctuating with design depth and complexity, and at times, for new players, this is going to have a little bit of confusion. The best example of this, painfully, is at the start of the game. After you leave the tutorial planet of Bracca, you arrive at Bogano. It has a linear structure that a lot of players are going to be very familiar with if you've played Uncharted, and a narrative lead carrying you through the game, essentially holding your hand. It's here Bogano's layers and complexity are played down until much later in the game when you return to it and it opens up into a fully realized Metroidvania style. But on first arrival, it never makes you feel lost or frustrated or confused. And there's a certain expectation that comes with the game up until this point and its level structure. Now contrast this with the next planet, Zepho. The level suddenly balloons beyond anything you experience up until that point. This level had layers within layers, hidden passages, a mixture of locked and unlocked elevators, zip lines to varying levels, dead ends with long walks back, one-way slides that would ruin any progress I'd made up until that point, ultimately culminating in some of the most frustrating gameplay I've experienced in years. And it's right here, this is the reason why I left this game alone for nearly 3 years. At a certain stage, the frustration, the slow progress, and lack of clarity at this point took too much time away from what was otherwise a brilliant and engaging experience. The cherry on top is perhaps the Zelda-inspired puzzles scattered across every planet, which are all reasonable in difficulty except for a few particular puzzles, and they are all on Zepho. At the time of writing, the handful of puzzle walkthroughs on YouTube for Zepho have 5 million views. The game has been played by approximately 20-ish million players. I do not think there is a bigger indictment of your level design than 1 in 4 players having to look up a guide to simply navigate the core path of your level. All that said, Zepho was an anomaly, and this frustration was momentary in an otherwise brilliantly designed and paced experience. So, is it required to play Fallen Order if you want to play the exceptional Jedi Survivor? Yes and no. At the start of Survivor, you are giving a previously on montage to catch up on all of the events that take place throughout Fallen Order. But if you really want to appreciate the story, the characters, and the journey of Cal Kestis and his crew, I think you have to experience Fallen Order in its fullest, even if it's just playing through on easy to get a feel for everything. To live through the story in a way that you should do. No montage, no YouTube video. Jedi Survivor is made all that much better of an experience when you see the progression from one game to the next. Story beats are more heartfelt, gameplay feels tighter and more finely tuned. The introduction of new mechanics and all-around game feel sets the games miles apart. But that appreciation of Survivor is almost impossible if you don't give Fallen Order the time it deserves.